So when I did youth ministry in the mid-'80s for a Lutheran church in Illinois, didn't know much about youth ministry. I had a degree in biology and religion, but aside from that, so I went to several seminars, youth ministry seminars that they would give. And I remember one specifically that they said, when you compliment a student, you go to their parents and you say, Lizzie is probably the best, one of the greatest students I've ever had. She's got such a gift, and she's sitting right there, right? They said when you compliment, a student to the parents, make sure the student's sitting right there so they can hear this. So it's not just, it makes it more real. It gives them something a little bit extra, So I imagine Jesus is doing the same thing with his disciples. I'm talking too fast, aren't I? Okay, slow down. So Jesus prays for people too. The disciples have a special place in Jesus' heart. And we find that, even after Judas had betrayed Jesus, now they're down to 11, So what are they going to do? They feel that the number 12 is important. And it was, the 12 tribes of Israel. So they need to find someone to fill in for Judas Iscariot. Hopefully not someone who is like Judas Iscariot. We don't want that to happen again. So they find a couple people, Matthias and Justus. And what I find interesting is Peter was telling the people in Acts, he said, they've been with us from day one, from the baptism by John the Baptist till his death. And yet we, as readers, and we haven't heard a thing about them. They're just kind of the behind-the-scenes players, and not like we know anything about that in our ministries, right? Some people don't like to be named. They just want to be quietly behind the scenes doing their job, and that is that. We find that Justus and Matthias have been with them throughout the last 3 years, and I imagine their theology is pretty sound. If they're witnessing the same things the 12 are, that Jesus is making sure the people are fed, the people are healed, the people are, included in what's ever going on, and it doesn't make a difference whether they're male or female or Jew or Gentile or leper or whole or what have you. So they're witness to all this, and we find that even then, they had to have redundancy, right? We hear that word all the time in business. If you have an important job, you make sure someone else knows that, just in case something happens to you, right? I'm reminded of the movie Apollo 13, right? Tom Hanks. They had the A-team, the training, and then, who was it? What's his name? The guy that, who I'm thinking about. What's his name? What? Yeah, Gary Sinise. His character is, not Jack Swagger. It's Ken Mattingly. That's it. Thank you. So Ken Mattingly may have the measles. He's scrubbed for the mission because you can't send him up in space and infect 2 other guys, and then the whole thing is deadly. It could be deadly. So they scrubbed Ken right at the last minute. Oh my God, what are they going to do? Well, of course, they had Team B training the whole time, alongside Team A, just in case something like this might happen. So Jack Swagger comes in, and they have a successful failure, right? Because they didn't make it to the moon, but they came back alive. A miracle upon miracles. And so these disciples say, you know what? We have an abundance of people. We don't know how many there were following Jesus. They were men and women, I'm sure, that were following along and captivated by his mission and ministry and his words. So they picked 2. And I find it interesting that they, it's 2 great candidates. And I wonder if they do this in the business world too. They go in the corner and they go, 2 out of 3. Or, okay, Bill, you're it. Flip of the coin. That's how close it is. And yet this is how things were done back then. Casting lots, because it was so close. And either way, either one they picked would have been great. It's that hard, but it's important for them to carry the faith story along, so they made sure their numbers were full. Faith is important. Okay, movie reference number 2. Yes. Pale Rider, Clint Eastwood movie. This is an older one back in the 80s, I think. What? Yeah, anyway, Clint Eastwood plays a gunslinger who portrays a pastor, preacher. We have a businessman who's crooked, and he has some people under his thumb. This town. He owns this town. He owns the people. Nothing get by without this owner. He runs and rules everything, and no one has a say. It's like slavery. So Clint Eastwood comes into town on his horse, and he starts interacting with people, and they start rebelling a bit. And so this businessman's right-hand man comes to him and says, yeah, we have a stranger in town. And the businessman, I know. What's this all about? And he says, well, he's just a preacher. Yeah, just a preacher. Just a preacher. Yeah, just a preacher. And the businessman said, preacher? We don't want that. Preacher gives them faith. Oh my gosh. And with faith comes hope. Whereas he's tried to crush all of their hope. He's tried to crush all of their faith because that's the last thing to go. And then he's really got them. But the preacher comes and gives them faith. Something to hold on to. Wow. And so these disciples figured that this faith story is just as important because it gives people hope. It gives people life. It gives people an opportunity to do something new with their lives, a hope for something better. You know, I can't imagine following a John the Baptist out in the country, this guy who probably hasn't bathed in years and just is slovenly, and yet he's baptizing hundreds of people. They're flocking out of the cities to meet John the Baptist because he is giving them hope. He's giving them a new direction, a new way of life that they're not used to. And so this faith continues for us too. This faith continues. Our lives are part of this journey, and part of the disciples are naming not only Justus and Matthias, but you and me and all of us sitting here. To continue in the Word, to continue spreading the gospel, to continue the mission of Jesus, to make sure that people are fed, people are clothed, people who are in prison are prayed for, or visited, or hopefully there's renewal, and there's trust, and there's a new way of being with people. In a world sometimes it's hard to have faith, it's hard to have hope. And yet, little by little, we pick away at it, you know? I'm sure when you're in a mine, you, of course, use dynamite too, but, I mean, you pick away at an axe, and little by little, you get some things going, you know? And we are filled with the love of God to complete our journeys, and we have the strength of those around us to complete our journeys as well, because there's times when we're weak, there's times when we're tired, times when we fail, you know, and then there are times that when we do this, when we're vulnerable, when we're low, that people will help us to pick us up again as we pick others up from their journeys and their hardships, and we can be there for them too. Jesus gives them direction, and Jesus gives them the Holy Spirit and gives them faith to continue. And Jesus starts his ministry in prayer, and he ends his ministry with prayer. And so he's revolving around this central relationship with God that Jesus has. You know, at times when he's having a tough time, he goes out to pray, and we don't know how long, if it's for a minute, hour, a night, a day. But he finds it important to be in constant communication with God because prayer is important. How does it work? That's the question, isn't it? How does prayer work? Is it for us? Is it for my benefit? Is it for your benefit? Is it for God's benefit to continue the relationship and make God feel good that I'm still trusting in you, God, and I still love you, and I know that I'm being a part of you? Or is it something more? Is there something to prayer that Jesus knows that the disciples yet don't know, and sometimes we don't know? You know, and when Mom was with cancer, I told her 3 churches were praying for her, and she just felt lifted. She felt better. She felt more of something. I had a a friend who was a church council president, and they had a consultant come in and do some work with the council, and he said, just for giggles, the prayer thing, let's try something different. Let's send Gary out of the room, right? So Gary went out, my friend Gary went out of the room, and he said to the council, I want you to think of all the great things about Gary. Just think of him as the best person you've ever met, and just think of just wonderful things about him, and don't show any expression on your face. Don't let anything go by physical. So when he comes in, just think good thoughts. And so Gary comes in, and he looks at the council, and he says, you know what? I feel like I could walk on air for some reason. I just feel great. I said, okay, good. Yeah, go out of the room again. And they said, this time, I want you to think all the evil thoughts you can. Just think he's the worst scum of the earth, and you've got all these problems with him, and he's just the worst. But don't show any expression. So Gary comes back in, and they all look at him. And my friend Gary said, you know what? I'm a pretty rational guy, but I came in there, I thought I could barely lift my arm. I don't know what it was. What is it? Is that part of prayer? Is we all come together and we just have this sense of strength about us that lifts people up? It's amazing what prayer can do. We don't know. It's a window. It's a window to our relationship with God. Some people say our lives are prayer. In whatever we do is a call to prayer. If we tie our shoe, it's a prayer to God. If we talk to God, if we help each other, we communicate, we live our life as if it's prayer to God. That constant connection that can't be broken. So God gives us ways. And God has found ways to get around our stubbornness and our ways of putting up walls. And there's always something there for us. Now Jesus gives his disciples something special, a prayer, that they may continue to do so themselves. Because oftentimes they couldn't heal without prayer. And that's what God does. He gives us the tools that we need. Because God is all in all. The death on the cross freed us to be children of God. Amen.